MMA trainer mocked a black janitor. Seconds later, he was out cold. He was never supposed to be inside that cage. A janitor, a man who spent his days sweeping sweat-soaked mats, scrubbing locker rooms, and collecting discarded towels after brutal sparring sessions. To the fighters, he was invisible, just another faceless worker in the background of their glory. But on that one unforgettable night, he was pushed into the spotlight. Not by choice, not by pride, but by arrogance and cruelty. And within seconds, everything would change. The gym smelled of blood, sweat, and iron. Fighters moved like predators, their muscles gleaming under the harsh fluorescent lights. In that world, strength wasn't just physical, it was status. And to the MMA trainer who ran the place, nothing seemed more entertaining than mocking the man he thought was beneath him. He laughed, he jeered, and finally, he issued a challenge he believed would humiliate the janitor forever. "Step into the cage," he said. "Show us what you've got." The room filled with cruel laughter. Phones came out. A dozen cameras ready to capture what they thought would be the fastest, most humiliating beatdown anyone had ever seen. After all, who could expect a middle-aged janitor wearing worn-out shoes and a sweat-stained uniform to stand a chance against a seasoned MMA trainer with years of fighting under his belt? The janitor's hands trembled, not from fear, but from something deeper, something he had buried long ago, a part of his past that nobody in that gym knew about, a part he had worked hard to keep hidden. As he stepped onto the mat, the trainer smirked, circling like a predator ready to toy with its prey. The bell rang, the crowd jeered, and in that split second the janitor's eyes changed, calm, focused, like a man who had already been here before. What followed was so fast, so brutal that the laughter in the room froze mid-air. One hit, just one, and the mighty trainer was flat on the canvas, motionless. The room went silent. The cameras that had been raised to mock were now recording history. But how did a forgotten janitor pull off the impossible? And what secret had he been hiding all along? This is the story they never expected to tell, because it's the one they'll never forget. By all appearances, Darnell Washington lived a life that most people overlooked. He was the janitor at one of the city's most prestigious MMA gyms, a place where champions were built, where men with ambition carved their names into the sport with blood and sweat. Every day, before the first fighter arrived and long after the last one left, Darnell was there, mopping the floors, cleaning the mirrors, emptying the overflowing trash cans stuffed with protein bar wrappers and energy drink bottles. The fighters barely noticed him. At best, he was the quiet man who nodded politely when they passed by. At worst, he was the butt of their jokes, mocked for smelling like bleach, for carrying buckets, for existing in a place where glory was supposed to matter more than grit. Darnell never complained. He had bills to pay, a small apartment to keep, and a quiet life to protect. But what no one knew was that behind his calm, unassuming presence, there was a history he never spoke about. Darnell had once been more than just a janitor. Years earlier, before life beat him down, before tragedy stripped him of his ambitions, he had trained. Not for glory, not for money, but for survival. He had grown up in a neighborhood where every day was a fight, and knowing how to defend yourself wasn't a choice, it was survival. Back then, he had learned discipline, precision, and patience. But when family responsibilities consumed him, when bills, heartbreak, and life piled on, he had left it all behind. Now all that remained was a man trying to stay invisible. The gym itself was a world of its own. Fighters came and went, strutting with confidence, flexing for the cameras. The trainer, Marcus Kane, was the king of this kingdom. Loud, arrogant, and built like a wall of muscle, Marcus demanded respect from everyone in the room. And he got it. Everyone except Darnell. Not because Darnell disrespected him, but because Darnell refused to feed Marcus's ego. While others laughed at Marcus's jokes, Darnell just kept mopping. While others flinched under Marcus's bark, Darnell just kept working. And that made Marcus furious. One evening, when the gym was especially packed, Marcus spotted Darnell sweeping by the cage. The trainer had been in the middle of boasting to a group of fighters about his undefeated amateur career, his power, his dominance. And then, like a predator spotting easy prey, his eyes fell on Darnell. "Hey, Janitor," Marcus sneered loudly, making sure everyone heard. "Bet you think you could last a second in here, huh? Come on, drop the mop and step into the cage." The gym erupted in laughter. Phones were raised instantly, fighters egging him on, waiting for the janitor to humiliate himself. Darnell froze, his eyes on the floor, trying to defuse the situation by ignoring it. But Marcus wasn't going to let it go. He wanted a show. He wanted to crush the man who never bowed to him. That moment, seemingly small, was the spark that lit the fire. Darnell could have walked away. He could have swallowed the insult, cleaned up quietly, and gone home. But something inside him stirred. A lifetime of being underestimated. A lifetime of carrying weight no one else saw. And the faint, almost forgotten whisper of the discipline he had once lived by. The crowd jeered. Marcus mocked. And for the first time, Darnell lifted his eyes, not with anger, not with pride, but with something else entirely. Calm. Nobody knew it yet, but this wasn't going to be the joke Marcus thought it was. This was going to be the night everything changed. The laughter in the gym echoed against the steel beams, bouncing off the padded walls like a chorus of mockery. Fighters stood around the cage, smirking, whispering, phones in hand, ready to record. Some were amused, others eager for the spectacle. Nobody believed the janitor would last more than a second against Marcus Kane, the undefeated trainer who prided himself on breaking even the toughest of rookies. Marcus strutted around like a peacock, removing his shirt, flexing his muscles for the cameras. "Come on, Darnell," he roared. "Show us what you got, or are you just going to hide behind that mop forever?" The crowd erupted with jeers. "Get in the cage, janitor! Don't be scared! Come on, old man!" Darnell stood still, broom in hand, his chest rising and falling with calm breaths. He could have walked out. Nobody would have blamed him. But then Marcus leaned in close, his voice dripping with venom. "You don't belong here," Marcus sneered. "You're just a cleaner. Stay in your lane, or I'll put you there." Something inside Darnell snapped, not in anger but in resolve. Slowly, he placed the broom against the wall. The gym fell into a hush. The janitor was actually stepping forward. His worn work boots echoed against the mat as he climbed through the cage door. He didn't posture. He didn't flex. He just adjusted his simple work clothes, squared his shoulders, and looked at Marcus with eyes that were steady and unshaken. The crowd roared. Phones tilted higher. Everyone wanted to catch this moment, the humiliation of the janitor. The bell rang. Marcus came out swinging, wild and confident, taunting as he moved. He threw a jab that sliced the air inches from Darnell's face, then a mocking laugh. "Come on, fight back, janitor!" But Darnell didn't bite. He didn't even flinch. He kept his hands low, his body loose, his eyes fixed. Years of discipline, of training buried under years of silence, were waking up inside him. He was reading Marcus like an open book. The crowd grew restless. "Hit him!" they screamed. "Don't just stand there!" Marcus smirked and lunged forward with a heavy right hook. Darnell slipped it effortlessly, his movements sharp but calm, like water flowing around stone. Gasps rippled through the room. He wasn't just surviving, he was moving like he belonged there. Marcus growled, embarrassed. Sweat dripped down his face as he threw punch after punch, each one missing by an inch, each one dodged with surgical precision. Darnell's footwork was tight, measured. He wasn't rushing. He was waiting. Then, with the entire gym screaming, Marcus backed him into the corner of the cage. "Nowhere left to run, janitor," he bellowed, raising his fist for a knockout blow. But in that instant, something shifted. Darnell's stance changed. Subtle, but sharp. His body aligned. His breathing slowed. And for the first time, the fighters watching realized something was wrong. The janitor didn't look afraid. He looked ready. The crowd's laughter started to fade, replaced by murmurs. Phones zoomed in closer. Something was about to happen. Darnell's eyes locked onto Marcus's chest, not his fists, not his face. He saw the opening, years of muscle memory, long buried, snapped awake in an instant. And as Marcus unleashed his wild punch, Darnell stepped forward with a single, precise strike. The impact echoed through the cage like a gunshot. Marcus's body froze, then crumpled to the mat. For a moment, silence, absolute silence. The arrogant trainer who had mocked the janitor, who had demanded a show, was flat on his back, knocked cold in one hit. And the man everyone dismissed, ignored, or laughed at? He stood tall, calm, breathing steady, like he had known all along how this would end. The crowd exploded. Shouts, gasps, screams filled the gym. Some couldn't believe it. Others cheered wildly. Phones shook as they captured the aftermath. What was supposed to be a joke had turned into the most shocking moment the gym had ever seen. And Darnell? He didn't celebrate. He didn't gloat. He just looked down at Marcus for a moment, then turned and walked away. But the look in his eyes said everything. This wasn't luck. This was the moment the world remembered that even the quietest man in the room carries a history you know nothing about. The thud of Marcus Kane hitting the canvas reverberated like a thunderclap through the cage. For a few seconds, the world stood still. The man who had strutted, mocked, and boasted, the undefeated trainer, the so-called king of the gym, lay sprawled out, his body limp, eyes rolled back, chest heaving shallow breaths. The crowd froze, mouths hanging open, phones trembling in stunned hands. Nobody cheered. Nobody laughed. Not yet. The silence was louder than any roar. Then came the gasp. Sharp, collective, like the air had been ripped from every lung at once. "He's out," one of the fighters whispered, voice cracking. Marcus, the invincible, Marcus, the showman, Marcus, the bully, knocked out cold, and it had taken just one hit. The crowd erupted. Screams, shouts, disbelief filled the gym. "No way! That didn't just happen! Did you record it?" Phones angled frantically, people shoving each other to capture Marcus lying unconscious on the mat. Some of his students rushed toward the cage, banging on the fence, trying to wake him. Meanwhile, Darnell stood motionless. His chest rose and fell in steady rhythm, his stance still balanced, his fists loose at his sides. He hadn't come to prove a point. He hadn't come for applause. He had simply defended his dignity, and in doing so, he had shattered the entire hierarchy of that gym. When Marcus finally stirred, groaning, clutching his jaw as his eyes blinked back into focus, humiliation washed over him. He pushed himself up on shaky arms, looking around the cage, desperate to reclaim some shred of dominance. But every phone camera pointed at him told the truth. He was beaten by the man he had mocked as just a janitor. The fighters who once cheered for Marcus now stood conflicted. Some looked at Darnell with newfound respect, their smirks erased. Others couldn't meet his eyes, ashamed of how they had laughed moments earlier. "Get up, Marcus!" someone shouted, trying to save face for the trainer. But Marcus couldn't. His legs wobbled, his pride heavier than his body. Darnell finally turned, walking toward the cage door. His steps were slow, deliberate, each one echoing louder than the chaos around him. He didn't raise his fists. He didn't smile. He didn't say a word. That silence was more powerful than any celebration, because in that silence the truth rang clear. Marcus wasn't the strongest man in the room. He was. As Darnell reached for the cage door, one of the younger fighters, barely out of his teens, called out, voice trembling with awe. "Sirs, who are you?" The question rippled through the crowd. Whispers spread like wildfire. Some guessed he was a former pro. Others claimed he must have trained secretly. Nobody knew for sure. All they had was the evidence of their own eyes, the way he had moved, the precision of that single strike, the composure that no rookie could fake. Darnell paused at the doorway but didn't answer. He glanced back once, his gaze sweeping the room. He didn't need words. The look alone said it all. "You thought I was nothing, but you were wrong." Marcus, still kneeling on the mat, his face bruised and red with shame, finally looked up at Darnell. For the first time, there was no arrogance in his eyes, only fear and respect. The janitor who had been invisible minutes earlier had become unforgettable. Phones continued recording. The video would spread. People would talk. Whispers would become headlines. But in that exact moment, within the four walls of the gym, something greater had happened. The power had shifted. The man with the mop had just mopped the floor with the champion, and nothing would ever be the same again. The noise of the crowd eventually began to fade, though the moment itself would echo forever. Marcus Kane sat slumped on the edge of the cage, his pride battered more than his body. Sweat dripped down his face, mixing with the humiliation that no towel could wipe clean. For years, he had paraded himself as the king of the gym, the master of discipline, the untouchable. But tonight, all of that came crashing down in front of the very students he had trained to laugh at men like Darnell. And Darnell? He didn't linger. He didn't strut. He didn't demand applause. He simply walked out of that cage the same way he had walked in. Quiet, humble, steady. His uniform still bore the faint stains of bleach and mop water. But to everyone watching, it looked more like a warrior's armor now. When he returned to the corner where his mop and bucket waited, the same crowd that once mocked him cleared a path. Their whispers filled the gym. Some stared in awe, others in disbelief. Phones were still raised, capturing every step he took. A video was already making its way online. The janitor who had knocked out the trainer, it was too sensational not to spread like wildfire. By the next morning, the footage had gone viral. Millions of views. Headlines asking, "Who is the mysterious janitor who knocked out an MMA trainer in one punch?" Sports commentators dissected the strike. Analysts slowed it down frame by frame. Some said it was too clean to be luck. Others speculated he must have had a background in fighting. Everyone wanted answers, but Darnell gave none. He showed up at the gym the next day as if nothing had happened, broom in hand, sweeping the same floors he always had. The whispers followed him. The stares grew longer. Fighters who had ignored him before now stepped aside, some even offering hesitant greetings. Respect, once denied, was now unavoidable. Marcus, however, couldn't hide from the fallout. Sponsors called with concern. Parents who had enrolled their kids under his training questioned his credibility. His arrogance had been his brand, and now that brand was shattered. The video didn't just show him being knocked out. It showed him mocking Darnell first, humiliating him, reducing him to just a janitor. And the public wasn't forgiving. The outrage wasn't just about the fight. It was about the disrespect. People began to see the story for what it truly was. Not just an upset in the ring, but a mirror reflecting society's tendency to underestimate, to belittle, to judge a man by his job or his skin instead of his worth. For Darnell, the impact wasn't measured in fame or recognition. He didn't crave either. What mattered was the shift in the air around him. The men who had once laughed now fell silent when he passed. The young fighters who had once dismissed him now studied his every move, hoping to catch a glimpse of the discipline and strength he carried so effortlessly. And Marcus, every time their eyes met, looked away first. Still, Darnell never gloated. He never reminded Marcus of the humiliation, never brought up the knockout. His victory wasn't about destroying Marcus. It was about reclaiming dignity, proving that no one, no matter how invisible or underestimated, was beneath respect. Weeks later, a reporter cornered him outside the gym, shoving a microphone into his face. "Why didn't you tell anyone you could fight?" she asked. Darnell smiled faintly, shaking his head. "Because I didn't need to," he said softly. "I wasn't here to fight. I was here to work." And with that, he walked away, leaving behind words as powerful as his punch. The world debated his past. Some claimed he must have been a former boxer. Others swore he was an MMA fighter who had vanished from the scene. The truth was simpler. He had been trained once, long ago, but life had pulled him in another direction. Yet the discipline never left him, just as his dignity had never left him. For those who watched the video, the lesson was undeniable. How many other janitors, maids, or workers do we overlook? How many stories, how much strength, how much brilliance do we dismiss simply because of a uniform or a paycheck? Marcus learned that lesson the hardest way possible, flat on his back, staring up at the lights of the cage. And though his jaw eventually healed, his reputation never fully recovered. He had become the cautionary tale, the embodiment of arrogance defeated by humility. Darnell, meanwhile, remained steady. He didn't quit his job. He didn't demand more. He didn't bask in the attention. He kept sweeping floors, cleaning windows, emptying trash bins. But now, every sound of his broom against the tile carried a different weight. Every bucket of water he hauled felt like a reminder. Respect cannot be demanded. It must be earned, and it must be given freely. And for those who were there that night, who saw it with their own eyes, the image never left them. The silence before the gasp. The thud of Marcus hitting the mat. The way Darnell walked away without a word. It was more than a knockout. It was a revelation. And long after the video stopped trending, after the headlines faded, after Marcus's name slipped into obscurity, one truth remained. Strength isn't measured by how loudly you boast, but by the dignity you carry when no one is watching. So the next time someone laughs at the janitor or sneers at the maid or dismisses the worker in the uniform, perhaps they'll remember Darnell. Perhaps they'll think twice. Because behind every overlooked face there's a story, and sometimes all it takes is one hit to make the world finally pay attention.